Birthday Surprise by Patrick M. McGinley. About 7 years ago, my wife and I bought a small 2-story early 19th century house. It was small for us, yes, but it had recently been completely gutted and renovated. They even built on a huge 2.5-car garage onto the back. I had one of those outdoor cellar doors you see on older houses, and after a year of living there, my wife had an idea for it. "A she cave," she repeated excitedly in response to my quizzical look. I laughed, but since we were storing everything in the huge and easy access loft above the garage, I shrugged and said why not. For a while, she lived down there. She loved doing crafts and reading, activities not at all compatible with our rambunctious little boy running around the house. I could only imagine the little world she was creating down there. I never bothered her while she was down there. It was her sanctuary, and she always respected when I needed me time, so I had no problem doing the same. Her activities came in waves after that. She would be down there every day for a week, then not again for a month. I guessed she would recharge with personal time, then feeling fulfilled, she would return and give us her absolute best the rest of the time. It was wonderful. Since she completed the she cave, she was always happy and easygoing. She seemed to be completely stress-free. My wife's birthday was a day away, and I got her an absolutely amazing gift. And I wanted to surprise her by sneaking it into her cave, as she and my son were going to be out for a few hours. I swung open the double doors to the stairwell, and at the bottom of the stairs was another door. I didn't remember that door being there when we bought the house. Confused, I walked down the steps and tried the handle. Locked. The door was locked, but there was no keyhole. Looking around, I noticed an old keypad mounted on the wall to my left. It looked like it had been from an old telephone booth. I was shocked and impressed. She must have done this while I was on one of my business trips. Whatever she was working on required more security than the crappy padlock on the old cellar doors. I tried our son's birthday first. It beeped, but the door remained locked. I tried our anniversary, and the door chimed, thunked loudly, and popped open slowly. Ah, our anniversary, how sweet. The door was heavy steel and had rubber gaskets around the edges that sealed the door against the frame. Once the seal broke, cold air flooded over me, raising goosebumps up my arms. The windowless cellar was pitch black beyond the first few steps, but I could notice in the low light the bright white tiles of the floor. Even more confused, I stared at the unexpectedly pristine flooring while my hands took turns holding my wife's gift and searching blindly on the wall for a light switch. A crisp click of the switch, and dozens of fluorescent lights buzzed to life above me. The brilliant white bleached my eyes for a moment. When my eyes had fully adjusted, I could not believe what I was seeing. There were 3 gleaming stainless steel tables lined up 3 or 4 feet apart, parallel to one another. 2 of the walls were lined with deep freezers, the source of all the cold air. The wall the door was on had a couple of floor-to-ceiling cabinets, doors closed. The 4th wall drew my attention. Spanning the whole length of the wall was a stainless steel shelf, and as I cautiously approached, I noticed it was covered with carefully placed and spotless tools. All kinds of tools. There were garden tools, saws and hammers of various sizes, and surgical tools. Syringes, scalpels, clamps, forceps. I turned back toward the door and opened one of the cabinets. Jugs of chemicals were on every shelf. I set my wife's gift down and started turning them. All sorts of acids and cleaning agents. Some of the bottles were marked with labels in other languages. I closed the cabinet and headed for the freezers. I knew what I was going to see before I opened it, but I still needed to see. I opened the freezer door and looked inside. Eyes looked back at me. Several clear bags containing slightly freezer-burned heads filled the cooler. I didn't check the others. I knew one would have arms, legs in another, torsos in the last. In a daze, I stepped out of the room and closed the heavy door. The lock slid into place automatically, its dull thunk barely registering as I shambled up the stairs and locked the cellar doors. I couldn't stand the idea of facing my wife when she got home. Not sober anyway. I started drinking, heavily, in hopes that I would be inebriated enough by the time she got home that I could forget and go to sleep without confronting her. My plan worked. I was near blackout drunk when my wife and son arrived back at home. I remember her scowling at me for being in that state. I remember being lectured for having spent the day alone and using it to drink to the point I couldn't spend any time with my family. I nodded and agreed with her, mumbled apologies during her short-lived silences. It was something I had never done before, and after a while, her demeanor softened. She even started laughing at the things I said and did in my drunken stupor. Eventually, she helped me to bed, her earlier anger replaced by sweetness. She kissed me softly as I lost consciousness. I woke up, head aching, but no nausea. My wife wasn't in bed. I tucked my head into my son's room. He was still sleeping. In the kitchen, the baby monitor was on, and there was most of a fresh pot of coffee waiting, but my wife was still nowhere to be found. I sat at the table, drinking my coffee and reading an article about a missing person. One whose face I recognized as one from inside a freezer in my basement. I looked up to see my wife standing in the door. Her face was menacing, and in her hands she held the gift I had gotten her, the one I forgot to bring back with me from the cellar. "You should have stayed out of my space," she said in a sinister tone. "You know what this means, right? You must know what I have to do now, don't you?" she asked. I held her gaze for a long moment, measuring my next words carefully. I cracked a smile before I spoke. "You should have just told me," I said, chuckling. She cocked her head to the side questioningly, but remained silent. So I continued. "You should see what I have in the attic.